Welcome to this Precision podcast, and we are moving through menopause still. And I'm here this week with Felicia Foster. Felicia is the founder of Sleepability, and she is a homeopath. I'm fascinated to talk homeopathy. So welcome, Felicia. Thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Philippa. Thanks for the invitation. Really great to connect with you.
It's so great, isn't it? I love this. So we're talking about symptoms of menopause, one thing and another. But before we go to that, I just thought it might be good to tell us a little bit about what homeopathy is for those people who may not be familiar with it.
Yes, so homeopathy really it's a system of medicine in itself, but unlike conventional medicine, we tend to take a more totality view of the patient, and we prescribe remedies that are similar to a person's symptom picture. And that's a complete opposite of regular medicine, and it really confuses and confounds people. I'll give you an example. There might be 10 people that come to me with tonsillitis. I can probably guarantee that 6 of those people will probably have the same remedy. But then the other 4, they will have a more nuanced presentation of tonsillitis, and therefore the remedy will change accordingly. And homeopathy only ever works on the premise of similarity. And it's almost like the key in the ignition, if you like, of a car. You turn over the engine, it doesn't start. You put the right remedy in, off you go. And that really is it in a nutshell. And homeopathy also takes the broader view, the more holistic view of the patient. And another key is always to give an individualised remedy. One size doesn't fit all. It takes time to find that remedy, which is why the consultations are usually longer. But that's essentially what I do. I speak with people, get their symptom picture, prescribe the remedy that's similar to their symptoms, and then their body can move on.
That's the one thing I really love about homeopathy, is that it is very individualized, and that you are treating the whole person, and that you consider not just the physical symptoms, but the mental presentation of that person, their emotional symptoms, their general sensitivities.
Yes.
You know, I mean, all of us know that we've got our own little quirks, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the beauty of homeopathy, and it never ceases to amaze me just how unique we are. And what's normal for one person is not the case with somebody else. It amazes me what people live with and what they consider to be normal. It's a very humbling approach, actually. And it's always a pleasure to work with people and find out their story and what got them to that point, because symptoms just don't appear out of the blue.
No.
I think we very much live in a world where we like to label things, the diagnosis, while important and useful, that doesn't explain how we got there. And that's what homeopaths do. We explore how that person got there. I like to think of homeopathy as a kind of deep dive, really, into what's going on, in addition to the presenting symptom. And that's, as you say, how we find the individualised remedy for that person.
I know that, not all of us will suffer travelling through the menopause. Only a percentage of women will have difficulty with that. That's an interesting thought in itself. And I was reading that, the symptoms, that this journey that we make through menopause can be helped by actually feeling more accepting, coming to a place where we are more accepting of this situation. And that really speaks to the contribution of the central nervous system, doesn't it, to all our ailments, really.
Yes, I think, it's in our language. We fight an illness, we battle on, we push through, and actually there's so much more to be gained from a sense of acceptance. That's not to say submit and be a victim to, but to actually embrace what's going on rather than fight it.
Yeah.
And as you very rightly say, I think menopause is a journey. We travel through it. It's not the illness. It's a group of symptoms that women of a certain age experience, and most notably through a lack of estrogen. But that's not a disease. That's that's a transition.
Yeah.
And there's a lot we can do for ourselves to, I kind of think of it as peaks and troughs, really. We can manage the peaks and troughs more effectively if we follow certain steps and guidance.
It's definitely peaks and troughs. Definitely peaks and troughs. So, you know, for me personally, I did have, and still do actually, really struggles with sleep. And I know this is something that you're particularly interested and passionate about. So, you know, let's chat a little bit about the kinds of troubles that we experience and the kinds of things that we might be able to do to help.
Well, I think the keynote really, before even moving into homeopathy, I would say it's very much about what you eat. There are certain foods that we can eat more of and avoid, because that will, you know, make so much of a difference to the way our body performs. And it's about blood sugar balance as well, and certain foods will aggravate that, or not, as the case may be. So I think it's really important to make some general changes to your diet, and the keynotes always are dairy, sugar, alcohol, red meat, eat a more plant-based diet, because they're full of phytoestrogens, which our body will absorb. So as our own levels of estrogen reduce, top them up with a plant-based estrogen. So I think diet's a really important thing, Philippa. I think it's really important to address our lifestyle. You know, we now work, you know, we might be working mums, we might have elderly parents we're caring for. There's a lot more responsibility on us as women. And whilst that equality in the workplace and everything is fantastic, I think it brings a lot more for us to cope with. You know, I've worked with some amazing women over the years, and I remember one in particular was pregnant, and she was actually doing 3 directorship roles, and she was exhausted. And I said to her, it's okay to say no. You know, but she had this thing about women in the workplace, really, really important to her, proving herself. And she actually felt that to show any kind of weakness would be a detriment to her career. And I think, so this is what I mean by pressure at work. I mean, I think since 2008, you know, the so-called credit crunch, more and more work has been put upon people, and that has become the new norm. And now we have, you know, the pandemic and all of those worries. So, you know, stress, lifestyle, emotional well-being is a really important thing, and there are steps that we can take to help that. You know, there are certain herbs that we can use that help the estrogen levels, and then there's homeopathy to help you manage, not hopefully the peaks and troughs, but more the plateau, you know, and about finding that constitutional remedy to get you through your menopause, because yours will be different to mine.
Well, this is it. So you mentioned then the constitutional approach that homeopaths adopt, and that really is about a certain symptom picture. What would you attributes of an trait?
I would say, and attributes equally. Yes.
So we have our traits, and there are commonalities across people. You know, you can spot yourself. You know, those quizzes they do in magazines. You know, you can kind of, do you? Oh, I don't know. Throw the tea bag in the bin, leave it on the side. You know, whatever. You can spot yourself, can't you?
Yes.
So it's really you go through a very detailed discussion that picks out particular traits, and then people can be categorized to a certain extent. And that's really, correct me if I'm wrong, what we mean by constitution, finding out what somebody's underlying constitutional traits are. And then certain remedies will speak to those traits.
Absolutely. And so when I think of it, when I see a patient or a client, I'm always the unprejudiced observer. I'm looking at people through the lens of the remedies that they may be. And remedy states change throughout our lives, throughout the day. But a constitutional really is what we come into this world as. As a baby, what is our physical, what do we look like? Are we a small baby? Are we a larger baby? Are we easygoing? Are we a bit uptight? Are we quite needy? Are we quite independent? You know, all of these things, as well as are we warm to touch or a chillier person? And then certain foods we will be more attracted to than not. And that really represents, or it embodies the constitution. And that remains throughout our lifetime. What happens on top of that, Philippa, and around that is if we have a trauma, for example, teething. You know, that's the first big trauma we're likely to experience. You know, there will be a remedy to represent that, and that will always pretty much be related to the constitution. And then as we grow older, first day at school, perhaps exams, perhaps sibling rivalry, all of that stuff. These things are represented by other remedies, and they kind of graft on top of the constitution, if you like, and become a layer. And a lot of people like to use the analogy of layers of onion.
Oh yeah.
Onion, and then, you know, when you see the client who may be in their 20s or 30s, you begin to peel back those layers to reveal the underlying constitution. And pretty much when you identify that remedy, that will help, I would say, 90% of any particular ailments experienced by that person. But there might be, for example, as I said earlier, a trauma just on top of that constitution. And until you get that trauma remedy, that layer remedy, then the constitutional can't really come through to its full capacity. So it's fascinating. And that's how I view a case. And you know, I don't just do constitutional treatment, but that's one approach. There are very many approaches.
Talking about sleep specifically, you know, why don't we just unpick that a little bit? Because there are some people who find that the sleep is disturbed because of hot sweats, say, for instance, whereas other people, for me, it was I'd get palpitations and not so, I mean, a bit heated, perhaps. I'll admit to that. But just this general lack of getting deep down into sleep and feeling like you're constantly waking up and, you know, oh, gosh, it's putting my teeth on edge just thinking about it. What would we do with those kinds of situations?
Well, it's really difficult to say, you know, to give remedies off the top of my head like that. But certainly, you know, I'll be looking at your, you know, what's going on in your world, you know, your emotional makeup, you know, how you deal with worries. Are you a worrier? Are you actually quite fine with everything? That's really important because that will impact on, again, your hormones, your insulin levels, your stress hormones, which will affect your sleep hormones. And it is that cascade. Well, it's like an orchestra, really. Everything has to be in harmony. And if one part of that endocrine orchestra is out of sync, then others will be too. We also have to look at thyroid. That's always impacted at hormonal shifts, whether it be puberty, childbirth, menopause. Thyroid health is really important for women in particular. There's a direct link between the generative system and the throat. So that's a really important thing to check out.
Did you say the generative system?
Generative, yeah. Some people refer to the reproductive system as the generative system.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. And so yes, there's two ways of referring to that. So yeah, certainly in women, that's got to be checked out. Again, going back to the analogy that menopause is a process and a journey rather than a disease or a condition of lack. Yes, for sure, the ovaries going to decline in terms of the amount of estrogen they produce, but your adrenals produce a little bit of estrogen to support that process, to try and smooth out those peaks and troughs. And I think therein lies that connection with the hot flushes Most of them are rising, that they come up the body. Very rarely do they go down. They tend to come up from the back, or perhaps even the feet, but certainly the lower body, and they come in an upwards movement. And there's usually a timing to it. And I think you'll find that will be your adrenals kicking in. And that's why you get that instant flush. So if we can manage our adrenals, we will certainly get through menopause a lot more easily.
And so that's about emotional, psychological sort of stresses and strains, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The adrenal fatigue is very real. And I think it's going to be exponentially so going forward because of people's concerns and worries, changes in livelihood, everything. On every level, change is very, very unsettling. Some people more than others. Some people thrive on change, others resist it. And therein lies that constitutional difference. What is it that makes you the person you are and experiencing the symptoms you experience? Your symptoms and character are very different to other women. And that's the beauty of homeopathy.
Yeah, well, that's always been my thoughts around it. Like I said to you, I started using homeopathy 20 years ago when my son was sick as a baby, and he was treated for a cancerous tumour and chemotherapy and IV antibiotics and all this horrible stuff, which obviously saved his life. But as a parent at that point, you're thrown into a spin. That was really when I started on my journey of whole food nutrition, organic food nutrition.
Yeah.
He had cranial osteopathy because he had, loved it, for his constipation, which he suffered from as a consequence of his
medication.
And then we started seeing a homeopath, and of course the essential oils is something I use, and all these considered complementary approaches because I could use them in the context of alongside this conventional medicine that was saving his life. And I've used these things all through my children's life, and I have my own homeopathy Bible. I am no homeopath, absolutely not. But I have a certain level. I've used it with such success on the children, and it is this it's a very holistic approach, and it doesn't work on its own as well as it does if you optimize the situation with a good diet and good.
We are what we eat. We are what we eat, Philippa. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And it is about taking responsibility for those different elements of our lives and what we can do for ourselves. And I would never purport to be homeopathy only. I wouldn't want to be without medical science. It has its place, absolutely. But I think sometimes it loses in trying to do everything and certainly manage the everyday things. Shall we say it takes too broad a stroke, too broad a view, or it becomes extremely myopic.
Well, so I think, so my view is it's maybe more the latter, actually, what you said, because this, increasingly, the more we start to know about the microbiome and the fact that individuals across the world will have more variety in the microbiome than they do in the genetics.
Yeah.
So, that is the thing that really sets us apart as well, not just that, I'm sure there are other things. but it certainly, it highlights our individuality is what I'm trying to say. And that sometimes that is the thing that Western medicine doesn't necessarily acknowledge to the same extent as some of these approaches, like homeopathy in particular, where we're looking at constitutional, your personality traits, as well as your physical symptoms. And I really, it just resonates really with me that it's just not simple. I wish it was.
No. No, and that's the thing. And one day will be different from another. We have become so used to taking a pill for this, taking a supplement for that we've lost that bigger picture very quickly. Talking about the microbiome, there's very recent research around the gut being the biggest producer of melatonin, also in the pineal gland. So gut health is fundamental to your sleep. And just another point on the microbiome, it's a recent revelation in terms of medical science, but there was a medical doctor 200 years ago, Dr. Edward Bach, or Bach, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, famous for Bach flower rescue remedy. He actually created some remedies which represent all the 7 main gut flora. So he was going to actually make them into vaccines, but he actually met somebody at the homeopathic hospital, and they are now, we've had them for over 200 years. They're remedies that I use very, very frequently. We have quite well developed remedy pictures to include not only the gut problem, but the mental health issue. And so that connection between gut and brain was made over 200 years ago by homeopaths. But prior to that, don't forget traditional Chinese medicine. You know, they knew about it then. So we really need to look after our guts, certainly for menopause.
I mean, so guts is definitely something that's been a bother since. We won't go into too many details, but you know, the slowing of the passage through the guts, the decreased hydrochloric acid that interferes with the absorption of nutrients, and so our guts are just getting less efficient, aren't they?
But then a lot of the hormones are made in the gut as well. So gut health again is fundamental to hormonal health. And the other big thing that we really need to look at around menopause is liver. And that's not to say the liver's diseased or problematic in any way, but if we can support our liver health with herbs, homeopathy, nutrition, you'll find that you'll sail through menopause a lot more easily than if you didn't take care of your liver. Liver is also involved with heat production. It's kind of like a thermostat, really, or part of our thermostat. So the use of herbal remedies around homeopathy to support the liver and the adrenals is a really good way to manage menopause and sleep.
I know that the book that I have has a diet, a nutritional plan suggested for the liver. Do you have any thoughts around what kinds of things might be?
Green.
Oh,
anything green. Well, not anything, but yeah, green leafy vegetables, really, really good. So it's about plant-based diet.
Well, I can only think that, you know, the one thing that I've had to give up completely is alcohol. You knew I was going to say that.
I knew. Yes.
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Because clearly the liver is metabolizing alcohol, detoxification, 1 unit per hour, just so you know.
Yes, thank you.
1 unit per hour, the liver is able to cope with. So if you know how many units you might have had, then you can work out how long your poor old liver's got to work on it to.
And that's if it's functioning well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. And so the things that upset our liver are stress. From a Chinese medicine viewpoint, are emotions. Okay, so suppressed emotions, particularly stress, anger. Then if we add to that copious amounts of caffeine, whether it be coffee, particularly coffee, I would say, more so than tea, but caffeine will really affect the liver. It's something the liver has to work at, process. And then add to that medication. I kind of think of the liver as the sorting hat of the body. You know, is it friend, is it foe? Not sure. And it works constantly for us. And women's livers are anatomically smaller than men's. And they don't have the regenerative powers that the male liver does. So, you know, we're on the back foot straight away. But then as we combine that with menopause and the, should we say, the disruption in the endocrine system and the gut and everything else, it just becomes a no-go. If we strengthen the liver with diet, supplements, you know, some herbs, homeopathic remedies, that's not to say we can binge drink, and I wouldn't recommend that anyway, but the occasional glass of wine with dinner, how lovely. You should be able to do that. But there are other steps you need to take in order to help your body to do that.
I mean, I mentioned to you that I've spent the whole weekend doing yoga.
How lovely. I'd love to do that.
Oh, I know. I'm so lucky I am. And so that, movement, we can cleanse our body with movement.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, particularly twisting motions are going to create pressure onto the internal organs and potentially assist in that cleansing process, certainly assist in digestion, the passage of the contents through the large intestine. And so, this picture where we're looking at good nutrition, exercise, and this, this idea of embracing the challenge, embracing the shift.
Yes, that creates a completely different structure in your body. You're flowing with it rather than resisting it. That's massive. And that will help phenomenally. And I'll have to say, water.
Water.
We need to drink our water to help the digestion, but also to remain hydrated. If we're dehydrated, the body perceives that as stress and creates the stress hormones. So, hydration is a really important keynote for general well-being, but certainly the symptoms experienced. Should we say some of the many, many, numerous symptoms experienced? And I've been very fortunate, really. Apart from hot flushes, I've not had any real problems, and I've learned to manage those with herbs and homeopathy. And I'm not in any way sitting here smugly. I really am not, because I know how awful that is. It took me, I know it's bizarre, it took me some time to work out what was going on. Oh, okay, yeah, that's becoming a bit of a pattern. I need to, or perhaps, and suddenly you realise it all makes sense.
I remember I went through a long stage where I just thought, I kept thinking, I've forgotten to change the winter quilt for the summer quilt. And somebody else said to me they had the same thing, and they couldn't pinpoint what was happening. And and this is because it starts way before we're expecting it to. These things start to creep in, slowly and gradually. And way before that window when you're expecting things to sort of occur. 5 years before, for me at least, maybe a bit more. And so you're not really necessarily even in that mindset or
No, and I think we're busy people. Women are busy people, not only with mums, we might have partners, we just do everything. we are, we multitask brilliantly, but sometimes so well that we kind of forget ourselves and our biological processes. And don't forget the women, some women go through really heavy periods in the run up to menopause, if not throughout their whole reproductive lives. And if they've had a hysterectomy, they are put into menopause. I've had patients who have woken up from that operation feeling like they've fallen off of a cliff, and they are their words, where that hormonal shift has been absolute and a real trauma. And pleased to say that some of the endocrine remedies we use really help support that process and turn the case around. But equally, as we say, constitutional and also polycrest remedies. Polycrest meaning, they help a lot of people for a certain type of symptom. That is very real for some women. I remember many years ago working with a lovely girl. I think she was in her mid-30s at that point, very young, and she was going into menopause and, was going through all the process of consultations with consultants. And she said to me, "Do you think there's anything you can do?" And I went, as I always do to a patient, I'll take your case and see what comes up, And so it was one of my earlier cases, to be fair. And so I gave her sepia, which is a really common remedy for women with hormonal problems. And it fits a lot of the symptoms that women experience. I would call that a polycrest remedy. Okay. It fits a lot of the symptoms that women experience in menopause. And it really helped her. And do you know what that remedy revealed? And it's like I say, peeling back the layers of the onion. And this is an amazing case. She had experienced a really bad car accident about 5 years prior to that, and her then partner, she was engaged to him, was killed.
Oh.
But she survived. She was injured, and 5 years down the line, she was happily engaged to another chap, and they were getting ready to get married and everything. And of course, menopause, they wanted children. Early menopause was horrendous for her as a concept. And so I gave her some shock remedies, and they went on to have a family. So she came out of menopause, and this is over a 3-month period. I gave her the shock remedy, and she kind of relived that trauma. And she said it's almost as though I'd forgotten about it. She said, obviously I hadn't, but I'd locked it away. And she relived it. She had really bad nightmares, and had to do a little bit of management around that for her. But essentially 2 months later, she came through that and went on, to become happily married and had children.
I mean, I do love homeopathy. I told you I had my second baby under the influence of homeopathy. I don't know if that's the way to put it. A home birth with the help of homeopathy. My second son. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
I do value it as part of it's in my first aid kit. Arnica remedy is in there, aconite for shock. And calendula for skin and healing.
Wounds generally.
Yeah. Hypericum is the nerve. If you've got a wound as well, it can help.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I value it as part of that. And the fact that although all of these things, we should remind people that we want to take caution if you're on medications, perhaps, but alongside Western medicine is where I feel it can sit very nicely to help us.
Absolutely. And I often treat people on very, very huge amounts of medication. I had a lady referred to me by a GP, and I mean it when I say she had 4 pages of medication, and her presenting symptom was indigestion. And she described a volcano in her stomach. And I'm thinking, I'm not surprised with medication, which of course I know why they're given. And she had quite a serious health condition, but nobody had reviewed that medication in over 4 years. And so I wrote back to her GP and I said, look, this is what I've prescribed. It's basically a detox cleanse, to help her liver and the kidneys process the side effects of the drugs, whilst not interfering with the medication, the desired effects. Within 2 months, she was a different woman. And so anyway, she did have her medication reviewed. There is a lot that homeopathy can do alongside conventional medicine. And I don't think it's one or t'other. I think it should be truly integrated and embraced. Now that NHS resources are hugely overstretched. Can you imagine? Give me the eczemas, give me the asthmas, give me the diabetes, give me all of that. If I can help somebody who's on medication that's struggling with that, I will do it. I see that as helping the National Health Service, the NHS. It's not one way is better than another. Complementary is my viewpoint rather than alternative.
There is no one size fits all approach.
There really isn't.
And the more tools you've got in your toolbox, the better.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for talking to me today about homeopathy and how we can help ourselves with it.
Yes.
And I hope that you have a fabulous rest of your day.
Thank you. Likewise, Philippa.
And we'll keep in touch, and I'll speak to you again, I hope, in the not too distant
future. For sure. Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for today, Philippa. I really appreciate it.